India, they don't know what to do with Bitcoin. India has banned it. They've thought about banning it. They didn't ban it. Then they banned it. Then they thought about not banning it. India is confused. But India has one of the largest populations in the world. I've been to India. I went with one of our other brothers. I love India. India is amazing because it has a bunch of different subcultures within the country, and they understand technology. They understand that they have a large population. They understand that they have a fast-growing population. They understand that they can now compete on a global stage. The internet is the ultimate even playing field. Anyone with an internet connection can now play. You don't have to move to the United States. You don't have to move somewhere else. You can do it right from your hometown. And that is why India is so interesting. But India can't figure out what to do with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. We've seen over and over and over again, they've put forward proposals. They've thought about banning it. They have, in some cases, actually been abrasive to it, and then they've backed away from it. What we now are seeing are reports that India will not ban Bitcoin. It will not ban the trading of cryptocurrencies. Instead, what they are going to do is they're going to regulate it as a commodity. There are multiple people in India who have been working tirelessly as part of the Bitcoin and crypto community to say that India wants Bitcoin. They use the hashtag and they put it all over the internet. They say India wants crypto. They use that hashtag and they put it all over the internet. And ultimately, what I believe will happen in countries like India and elsewhere around the world is that the will of the people will ultimately prevail. The governments may not be as educated. The governments may not be as experienced. They may not be as familiar with the technology and the advantages. And in some cases, the governments and the politicians may actually be trying to protect the incumbents. But you cannot deny the will of over 1 billion people who are saying this is superior technology and we want it. Then if you go ahead and you look at the 1.4 billion Indians who will soon have legal access to Bitcoin when the government releases its regulatory framework. Now, of course, Bitcoin has been banned recently in India. In January, they made the decision to not only ban Bitcoin, but to ban all private digital assets. And they had a very encompassing definition of what that meant. The government began to backpedal a little bit a couple of months ago. And by February 2022, the authorities say that they are going to release a legal framework for Bitcoin. This will be everything from defining how taxation will work around transactions and gains, but also who will be allowed to use it and what venues, how should companies be allowed to use it, etc. Many people may forget that in India, one of the big things that they did at one point was they basically applied pressure to the banks. And they said that banks will not be allowed to service the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency industry. If you are a bank, you cannot bank those companies. You cannot support those users. And so they tried to essentially choke off the flow of capital from the legacy system into the new system. But what they saw was that Indians found a way. The Indian population would not be stopped by words that were written on a piece of paper. Instead, what they did is they continued to adopt the asset. They continued to realize how powerful a global store of value that was a decentralized computer network, the strongest computer network in the world, one that had no censorship to it, and one that no one controlled and no one could debase. And so capital continued to flow, adoption continued to increase. We saw everything from mining to actual users on peer-to-peer exchanges continue to grow. And so, of course, just like in other countries that we've seen, like in Pakistan, etc., the Indian government has had to rethink their strategy. We've seen China do the same thing, where they banned the miners, and now they're thinking, wait, maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we should bring those people back. Maybe we should actually reverse our prior decisions. Ultimately, people realize Bitcoin is good for business, and Bitcoin is inevitable. You have an asset that no one can control, no one can shut down. And so ultimately, the game theory is simple. If you want to sit it out, you will miss out. If you want to participate, the sooner that you start to plug into the network, the more you will benefit. If you want to wait, then you will pay an ignorance tax. Whether you are building infrastructure, whether you are buying the asset, or whether you are allowing your business or your citizens to participate and use these assets. And so ultimately, when the game theory starts, every country will understand that these rails, these payment systems, these assets are superior. And that's what we're watching India do right now. So it's pretty cool to see that the will of 1.4 billion people is making the country rethink a policy that they were very, very adamant about for the last couple of years. And so that's a message to everyone around the world. If you and your fellow citizens believe in something, you do have a voice. The internet gives you the ability to voice that opinion, to stand up and to say, we want this. And ultimately, politicians, they do listen. May take them a long time. They may not make it obvious, but if the people want something, they'll get it. How cool is it that India now is saying, all right, we hear you guys. We're going to go ahead. We're going to create a framework, which not only is a framework to allow you to do it, also a framework around taxation so they can make money on it, right? But they are going to allow Indians to do this in a legal manner.
Yeah, so I don't want to do much public math here, but I was just looking it up. They have 1.4 billion people in India. The Earth has 8 billion. Just under 8 billion, I think, population-wise. That's 15% or so of the total population of the world. So it's obviously a massive tailwind for Bitcoin and digital assets. But it's cool to see, like, someone else has historically been against it. I don't know if that necessarily had a huge impact, right? We saw adoption actually increase after they banned it. And you could see other countries, maybe China ends up doing something like this, but ultimately it's obviously a positive anytime you can have more demand in the market and give more people access within a legal framework so they don't have to go outside and risk getting in trouble legally.
1.4. It's the second most populous country in the world, right? One thing I want to point out is that they recently in January, I believe, banned cryptocurrency in the sense of like transacting with it. I wasn't really sure kind of what legal framework they went around, but then they went ahead and they rebuked it, right? And now they're 10 months later, they're thinking about making it legal and trying to provide a legal framework by, I think, February of next year. That's an insane turnaround. And I think the more and more people look into this asset, the more and more people that want this asset, the governments are basically, their hand is forced to allow this when you live in a country like India. It's a big population. A lot of people coming into Bitcoin should be good for the price and adoption.
What do you think? I saw you ask in the chat, like, what are people in India thinking? Do you think how do you think they're feeling right now? Do you think this is like very, very big news, or do you think the people that were interested in Bitcoin specifically before, this is just kind of like, okay, I owned a Bitcoin, the government really couldn't do anything about it previously, or do you think they just feel safer now?
So I saw a couple of people talking about this. There's 3 takeaways that I have from this. One is that every government is eventually going to have to create a framework to allow people to do this, right? And how they do it, some will be better, some will be more onerous, whatever, but every single one of them will end up allowing this to happen. The second thing is that it's very obvious they're confused by it. Right? They thought that it was something like, oh, it'll just go away. It didn't go away. Now they're trying to figure out, what do we do? So there's like ultimately, or the inevitability is that they're going to accept it. The medium term or short term is that they're confused. And then there's this overarching thing of, if you're a country like India, where you have a massive population, you're actually pretty technology sophisticated, you can actually use this to drastically leap forward. Right? This is not a country that is necessarily so developed and so sophisticated and so far ahead that they're complacent. This is a country that is still hungry for progress and innovation and economic prosperity. And so what you can do is you can use technology. And the best thing that you can look at is, rather than try to be a top-down, centrally planned economy where you say to your citizens, hey, we as the government know better than you. Instead, what I think it should happen, and it looks like it is happening in India, is they're going to turn around and they're going to say, all right, here's the frameworks. We need to protect people to some degree. We're going to create this framework, whether they're good or bad, that's the framework. Now, take these tools and go win on a global stage. And I think that ultimately, politicians around the world, but specifically in countries like India, if you simply look at it as, hey, I got 1.4 billion people and we have stars here, right? We have absolute stars that are part of our population. And what we need to do is get the hell out of their way. We need to give them the tools and the technology and the education in order to be successful, and then literally just get out of the way. And if you just look at it, right, just look at it from a probability standpoint. The United States is about 330 million people. India has 1.4 billion people. They have a higher probability that the next Elon Musk or Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg or whoever is sitting in India rather than the United States. It's just a math equation, right? Now, do they have the same resources? Do they have the same education? Do they have the same access to capital? All this stuff. That's all up for debate. But from a pure pool that you're pulling from, the Indian population is so large. And what we've seen is a lot of these large venture funds, private equity firms, et cetera, they're going and they're investing heavily in India now. There's multiple billion-dollar businesses that have been built in that country. And so I think what you're going to start to see is that the government's going to wake up and say, wait a second, we saw what America just did in the technology industry for the last 30 years. They simply allowed people to use this technology to build massive businesses. And for the most part, the government stayed out of the way. Right? There's not a ton of regulation in the technology industry, and that's actually been a huge tailwind for it in the US. And in these other countries, what I think they're going to start saying is like, hey, give them the tools. Literally, let's go find the smartest people, the most innovative people we have in our population. Let's give them technology. Let's allow them to use these digital assets, and then literally get the hell out of their way. Because if you do it the right way, What's going to happen is that your citizens are going to lead you into the future. Your citizens are going to build the economy and kind of the world that you want to live in. It's not going to be the government. And I think that the governments around the world who think that they know better than the citizens end up struggling, and they end up holding back the progress of their citizens versus simply saying, hey, we are here to basically serve as guide rails, right? And we're going to create these frameworks and then literally tell us what you need. We'll get it to you. And then like just do your magic, right? Literally go build. And in a country like India with 1.4 billion people, now that the internet's available and they can compete on a global stage, I'm not betting against them.